Full story. This is the story of how I fought for freedom against my parents. Family life can be challenging, but when you're a teenager dealing with an already stressful environment, it can feel downright impossible. That's how it felt for me. A 15-year-old boy just trying to find my place in the world, while living in a household that revolved around my sister Alicia's complex medical issues. Alicia, who's 13, has been struggling with her health for as long as I can remember. Sometimes she's fine and can even enjoy life like a normal teenager. But other times she needs a wheelchair to get around, she's on multiple medications, and her condition limits what she can do. My youngest sister, Kaylee, is 12 and doesn't have any medical issues. She's just a regular kid like me, but somehow she seems to be handling our family dynamic better than I am, or at least that's what our parents think. I love my sisters. I really do. But over the years, my parents have turned me into something I never signed up to be. A third parent. At least that's how it feels. They expect me to be responsible, to take care of my sisters, especially Alicia, and to put aside my own desires for the sake of the family. While Kaylee seems to escape much of this responsibility, I'm always the one on the hook. Whenever I want to spend time with my friends, my parents discourage it. They say I should be home helping out, looking after Alicia or doing chores, and if I do manage to get out of the house, they often make me take one or both of my sisters along. But it's not just a casual take them with you, it's a commandment. Alicia's medical issues complicate things, of course, and sometimes she can't even participate in whatever we're doing. But still, I'm forced to bring her, and when I do, it's impossible for me to have fun. Instead of being a kid, I'm stuck playing caretaker, making sure Alicia and Kaylee are okay. Birthdays are the worst. When I get invited to a friend's party, it's supposed to be a chance to hang out with kids my own age, to let loose and have fun. But if my parents catch wind that my sisters aren't invited, or if I'm just allowed to go on my own, they either guilt-trip me into not going, or they demand that I take them along anyway. You can imagine how well it goes over with my friends when I show up with my two younger sisters in tow. Instead of celebrating and having fun, I end up babysitting. And if something goes wrong, if Alicia gets sick or Kaylee has a bad time, I'm the one who gets blamed. I remember one field trip where this all came to a head. It was supposed to be a fun outing, a day away from the stresses of home and school. But Alicia got sick and had to leave early, and Kaylee just didn't enjoy herself at all. When I got home, I was still buzzing from the excitement of the day. I told my grandpa about how much fun I had, only to get chewed out by my parents. They berated me for being spoiled, for acting like a child who didn't care about his sisters. And yet, when Kaylee later talked about how much fun she had at my best friend's birthday party at a trampoline park, a party I wasn't allowed to go to because my sisters weren't invited, she didn't get into trouble. It was like my parents relished the idea of me being the one who missed out. And then there's the issue of gifts. My parents get mad at me for not buying my sisters presents for their birthdays or Christmas, even though I don't have any money of my own. When my best friend's parents give me gifts, they act like it's some kind of betrayal, like I'm rubbing it in my sisters' faces. And don't even get me started on how they react when I get invited to my best friend's family events. They're always annoyed that my sisters aren't invited, even when it's something that's clearly not meant for them. When I try to talk to them about how all of this makes me feel, it's like talking to a brick wall. They don't want to hear it. They get annoyed when I confide in Grandpa, too, like I'm airing the family's dirty laundry. But what am I supposed to do? Keep everything bottled up inside? It's not like I can talk to my sisters about it. Alicia hates being left out, and Kaylee, well, she's just Kaylee. So now we're in family therapy. My parents dragged us all there, probably hoping the therapist would side with them and tell me to stop being such a problem. But I wasn't about to let them use therapy as another way to control me. When they started talking about how awful I am, about how I act like a 5-year-old who craves attention, I couldn't stay quiet. I told the therapist everything. How my parents treat me, how they expect me to be an adult, how they can't stand seeing me have fun without my sisters, and how they seem to get some twisted satisfaction when I'm the one who's miserable. My parents were furious after that session. They accused me of embarrassing them, of making them look bad in front of the therapist, but I didn't care. I was tired of being the scapegoat, tired of being the one who had to shoulder all the responsibility while my sisters got a free pass. And that's where we are now. Therapy hasn't magically solved anything. If anything, it's just brought all our issues to the surface. But at least I finally got to speak my mind. Whether or not it changes anything remains to be seen. As the weeks went by, therapy sessions became more tense and emotionally charged. My parents didn't take kindly to me speaking out, and the sessions often felt like a battleground where everyone was fighting for their version of the truth to be heard. The therapist, Dr. Patel, tried her best to mediate, but it was clear that there were deep-seated issues that weren't going to be resolved overnight. One evening, after a particularly heated session, I decided to go for a walk. I needed to clear my head, to get away from the suffocating atmosphere at home. I ended up at my grandpa's house, where I always felt welcome. Grandpa was sitting on the porch, as usual, with a cup of coffee in hand and a crossword puzzle in front of him. "Hey, kiddo," he said with a warm smile as I approached. "What brings you here?" I sat down next to him, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "Just needed to get out of the house for a bit," I admitted. Grandpa nodded as if he understood without needing to ask more questions. "Therapy not going so well?" he asked gently. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's not really making things better. If anything, it feels like things are getting worse. Mom and Dad just don't get it. They don't see how they're treating me, how unfair it is." Grandpa put down his crossword and looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, sometimes people don't realize how their actions affect others until they're forced to confront it. But that doesn't make it any easier for you, does it?" I shook my head. "No, it doesn't. And it's like they don't want to hear what I have to say. They just want me to be quiet and do what I'm told." Grandpa sighed, his expression turning somber. "Your parents are under a lot of stress, dealing with Alicia's medical issues and everything else. But that doesn't mean they should be taking it out on you. You're still a kid, and you deserve to have a childhood, to have fun, to spend time with your friends." "I just wish they would understand that," I said, my voice tinged with frustration. "But it's like they're so focused on Alicia that they forget I'm here too. And Kaylee, I don't know. She gets away with so much more than I do." Grandpa raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well, she doesn't have to deal with the same expectations I do," I explained. "If something goes wrong, it's like I'm the one who has to fix it. And if I'm having fun while my sisters aren't, I get in trouble. But if Kaylee is having fun, it's fine. I don't get it." Grandpa nodded slowly, as if piecing together a puzzle. "You know, sometimes parents don't realize they're being unfair. They get caught up in trying to manage everything that they lose sight of what's really important." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Then Grandpa spoke again, his tone more serious. "Have you ever tried looking at things from their perspective?" I blinked, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I'm not saying what they're doing is right," Grandpa clarified, "but sometimes it helps to understand why people act the way they do. Your parents are probably scared, overwhelmed, and maybe even a little lost. Alicia's condition is something they can't control, and they're probably terrified of losing her. So they cling to what they can control, which unfortunately includes you." I frowned, thinking about what Grandpa had said. I hadn't really considered my parents' feelings in all of this. I was so caught up in my own frustration and anger that I hadn't stopped to think about what they might be going through. "But that doesn't make it okay," I argued. "Just because they're scared doesn't mean they can treat me like this." "No, it doesn't," Grandpa agreed. But understanding where they're coming from might help you approach the situation differently. Instead of just fighting back, maybe try to talk to them about how you're feeling, but also acknowledge what they're going through. It might make them more willing to listen. I mulled over Grandpa's words, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me didn't want to give my parents the benefit of the doubt. I was tired of always being the one who had to compromise, who had to be the bigger person. But another part of me knew that fighting fire with fire wasn't getting us anywhere. Maybe I'll try that, I said finally, though I wasn't entirely convinced it would work. Grandpa smiled and patted my shoulder. It's worth a shot. And remember, you always have me to talk to. You don't have to go through this alone. I nodded, feeling a bit lighter than I had when I first arrived. Talking to Grandpa always had a way of making things seem a little less overwhelming. As I walked home that evening, I thought about what Grandpa had said. Maybe he was right. Maybe I needed to approach things differently. But even if I did, there was no guarantee that my parents would listen. Still, I knew I had to try, if not for their sake, then for mine. The next therapy session came faster than I was ready for. I had been turning Grandpa's words over in my mind, trying to figure out how to approach the situation without making things worse. But every time I thought about talking to my parents, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. What if they didn't listen? What if they just got mad again? When we all sat down in the therapist's office, I could feel the tension in the air. My parents were clearly still upset about the last session, where I had laid everything out in the open. Alicia and Kaylee were quiet, probably unsure of what to expect. Dr. Patel greeted us warmly and asked how things had been going since our last session. Before anyone could speak, I decided to take the plunge. I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about last time, I began, my voice steady but nervous. And I realized that maybe I haven't been as understanding of what you're going through, Mom and Dad. My parents exchanged surprised glances, clearly not expecting me to say that. I know that dealing with Alicia's medical issues is really hard, I continued, and I can't even imagine how stressful it must be. I understand that you're doing the best you can to keep things together, and I appreciate everything you do for us. Dr. Patel nodded encouragingly, and I could see my parents starting to soften, if only a little. But, I added, I need you to understand where I'm coming from, too. I'm still a kid, and I need to be able to have my own life, to spend time with my friends, and to have fun. I know Alicia's situation makes things more complicated, but I feel like I'm being held to a higher standard than Kaylee or even Alicia. It's like I'm expected to be an adult when I'm not ready for that. My parents looked at each other again, and I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They were really listening this time, and that gave me the courage to keep going. I'm not saying I don't want to help, I clarified. I care about Alicia and Kaylee, and I want to be there for them. But I also need to be able to be a kid sometimes. I need to be able to enjoy my life without feeling guilty or like I'm doing something wrong. There was a long pause as my parents processed what I had said. Alicia and Kaylee were still quiet, watching the conversation unfold. Finally, my mom spoke up. We didn't realize you felt that way, she admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. We've been so focused on trying to manage everything that we didn't see how much pressure we were putting on you. My dad nodded in agreement. It wasn't our intention to make you feel like you couldn't have your own life. We're scared. We're scared for Alicia, and we're scared that we're not doing enough as parents. I get that, I replied, feeling a wave of relief. But I need you to trust me, to let me have some freedom. I promise I'll be responsible, but I also need to be able to be a teenager. Dr. Patel stepped in, offering some guidance. It's clear that both sides are coming from a place of love and concern. What we need to work on is finding a balance, where everyone's needs are being met. That might mean setting some new boundaries and expectations, but it's important that we do this together. My parents nodded, and I could see a change in their demeanor. They weren't just hearing me, they were really listening. Alicia spoke up for the first time during the session. "I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of me all the time," she said softly. "I know it's hard for you, and I don't want to make things worse." Kaylee nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we're supposed to be siblings, not just caregivers." The conversation continued, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like we were all on the same page. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were still a lot of issues to work through, but it felt like we had taken a step in the right direction. As the weeks went on, the changes we had discussed in therapy started to take shape. My parents made a conscious effort to give me more freedom, allowing me to spend time with my friends without guilt-tripping me or forcing me to take my sisters along. In return, I made sure to be more understanding of their concerns and to help out when I could, but on my terms. Things were slowly improving, and for the first time in a while I felt like I could breathe. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was hanging out with my best friend James at his house. We were just playing video games, enjoying the fact that I could finally relax without worrying about what was happening at home. James had been my rock through all of this, always offering a listening ear when I needed to vent. As we were playing, James's mom, Mrs. Cooper, walked into the room with a tray of snacks. She was always super nice to me, treating me like one of her own kids. "Hey, boys," she said with a smile, setting the tray down. "I was just talking to your mom, and she mentioned that things have been going better at home. I'm glad to hear that." I nodded, grateful for her support. "Yeah, it's been better. Therapy is actually helping, which is a surprise." Mrs. Cooper gave me a knowing smile. "Sometimes it takes a little push for people to start seeing things differently. I'm proud of you for speaking up." As she turned to leave the room, she paused, as if she had just remembered something. "Oh, by the way, there's someone who wanted to talk to you. I'll send them in." Before I could ask who she meant, she left the room, and a moment later, Jessica walked in. I felt my stomach drop. Jessica was a girl from school, someone I had always thought was out of my league. She was smart, popular, and absolutely stunning. We had a few classes together, but we'd never really talked outside of school. So, to see her standing there in James's house, looking slightly nervous, was a complete shock. "Hey," she said with a shy smile. Hey," I replied, feeling like my brain had short-circuited. "What are you doing here?" Jessica laughed softly. "I'm James's cousin. I'm staying with them for a bit while my parents are out of town. I didn't realize you were the friend he was always talking about." I blinked, trying to process what she had just said. James had mentioned having a cousin who was staying with them, but I never put two and two together. "Oh, cool," I said, trying to sound nonchalant, even though I was internally freaking out. "So, what's up?" Jessica hesitated for a moment before speaking. "James told me about what's been going on with you at home, and I just wanted to say, I think it's really brave that you spoke up in therapy. It takes a lot of guts to stand up for yourself like that." I felt my cheeks flush. "Thanks. It wasn't easy, but it's helping." There was an awkward silence as I tried to figure out what to say next. Jessica seemed to be searching for the right words, too. "So I was wondering," she began, her voice a little hesitant. "Would you maybe want to hang out sometime? Like, outside of school?" My eyes widened in surprise. Was Jessica really asking me to hang out? I could hardly believe it. "Yeah, sure," I said, probably a little too enthusiastically. "I'd like that." Jessica smiled, looking relieved. "Great. Maybe we can go to the movies or something this weekend?" "Sounds good to me," I replied, trying to play it cool. As she left the room, I turned to James, who had been watching the whole thing with a smirk on his face. "Dude," I said, still in shock. "Did that just happen?" James laughed, giving me a playful punch on the shoulder. "You better believe it, man. Looks like things are finally turning around for you. I couldn't help but grin. Maybe James was right. Maybe things were finally starting to go my way. As the weekend approached, I found myself feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness about my upcoming hangout with Jessica. It was a welcome distraction from the challenges at home, and it felt like a small victory after everything I had been through. When Saturday rolled around, Jessica and I met up at the local movie theater. We had a great time watching the latest action flick, and afterward, we grabbed some ice cream and just talked. It was easy, comfortable, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could just be myself. Jessica was easy to talk to, and we found that we had a lot in common. She shared stories about her own family struggles, which made me feel less alone in what I was going through. It was nice to know that someone understood, and that I didn't have to pretend to have it all together. As the evening came to an end, Jessica and I walked back to her house, chatting and laughing. When we reached her front porch, she turned to me with a smile. "I had a really great time tonight," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Me too," I replied, feeling a warm sense of contentment. Jessica hesitated for a moment before leaning in and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "I'll see you at school," she said with a smile before heading inside. I stood there for a moment, stunned, before heading home with a huge grin on my face. Things were definitely looking up. Over the next few weeks, Jessica and I started spending more time together. We weren't officially dating or anything, but we were definitely more than just friends. It was a new and exciting chapter in my life, and it gave me something positive to focus on. At home, things continued to improve as well. My parents were making a genuine effort to be more understanding and to give me the space I needed. We were far from perfect, and there were still rough patches, but the therapy sessions were helping us communicate better. My relationship with Alicia and Kaylee also started to change for the better. They no longer saw me as just another adult in the house, but as their older brother who cared about them. One evening, as we were sitting around the dinner table, I realized something that made me smile. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. My family was healing, I had great friends, and there was even a possibility of something more with Jessica. Life wasn't perfect, but it was getting better, and that was enough.